Ever wondered why some trends are just suddenly everywhere? Newsflash, nothing gets popular by accident. I'm Brittany Luce, and on the It's Been a Minute podcast, I take the things you and I are both obsessing over and show you the invisible forces behind the scenes that make us love it or hate it. Be smarter about what you're consuming. Listen to the It's Been a Minute podcast today.
The good thing about anniversaries is that you know they're coming.
This is Brian Wolly, a name you might be familiar with from the credits of the podcast. He's the digital editorial director for Smithsonian Magazine, and he's a core member of the team who makes the show.
We wanted to do something big on the site for the 250th.
That is the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence and the founding of the United States of America. You may have heard it's a birthday year for the nation.
We have a major commemorative issue coming out for the print magazine this summer.
But the big thing that Brian and his team have been working on is a pretty remarkable map. So I wonder if you can just tell me what this map is.
We're calling this map 250 Places to Celebrate America. And it's all connected to the 250th anniversary, or the semi-quincentennial, to put the mouthful to it, of the United States. It's an interactive map. It's on SmithsonianMag.com, and it lists 250 sites across the country that all of them in their own sort of special and unique way celebrate the history of the nation and its inhabitants. So much like how the journalism in the magazine covers history, science, the arts, food, culture, we geared this map around the same idea. So we have these 10 different categories, and they all take a different look at the different parts of Americana.
How did you go about picking those spots?
We opened up the initial brainstorm to our entire magazine staff. We slowly whittled it down and wanted to make sure that we struck the right balance between everything. I discussed it with a curator at the American History Museum, who had some really great intel and feedback for us. And we sort of had two main criteria as we were building this list. One was, can we consider this place celebratory in some way, shape, or form? Is this something we can admire, some quality that showed American ingenuity, bravery, creativity, fortitude? Because not all the sites are necessarily happy sites, like including Pearl Harbor. But for us, it seemed like this list would be incomplete without some sites like that, where even these moments of sadness have spots within their narrative that we could admire and think about.
So you're trying to capture the dynamic range of the country.
Absolutely. So our two criteria then, one was celebratory, like we discussed, and the other was geographic diversity. We wanted to make sure that every state was represented. And so every state does have at least two spots on the map, because we wanted to make sure that all Americans would see themselves represented in some way on this map.
So were there meetings around a table where you were arguing or advocating for particular spots that you wanted?
On our food list, we were like, we got to have barbecue represented here, but we could probably do a whole list of just barbecue spots. But we couldn't. So we picked Bee's Barbecue in North Carolina as our stand-in for barbecue.
Oh, and there's a rivalry between North and South Carolina barbecue, isn't there?
Oh, and then there's Kansas City barbecue, then there's Texas barbecue. We actually have Franklin barbecue on there as well. That's Austin's really famous barbecue house. So at the end of the day, we had to pick one. And I was most concerned that our choice of Pequod's Pizza in Chicago for their deep dish pizza might end up being the most controversial on the whole list, because people just love to fight about food.
From Smithsonian Magazine and PRX Productions, this is There's More to That, the show that'll go to America's birthday celebration with a party hat on and ask some tough questions. I'm Ari Daniel. In this episode, we dig into what you can find on this new interactive map from SmithsonianMag.com, and we talk to a historian about what this semi-quincentennial means in the arc of history. Stay tuned. So how many of these places have you actually been to, Brian?
Well, that's a good question. I have not traveled nearly as much as I would love to. So I think I'm at maybe 30 to 40 or so of these spots. But that's including 6 spots in DC, which isn't really quite fair since I live here. But a lot of it, too, is pulled from our coverage in the magazine.
What about the question of time frame? How did you select both present day versus sites that are relevant to the past?
We did try to pull in parts of, the American Revolution, westward expansion, the era around the Civil War and late 19th century all the way through. We wanted to make sure that we had representation from all those different eras. One of my favorite spots on the list is actually at a Burger King,
Huh.
the Navajo Reservation, and it is a memorial and exhibit to the Navajo Code Talkers who helped the U.S. the victory in the Pacific during World War II. But it's at a Burger King franchise. The proprietor there realized that there was no real memorial and museum exhibit dedicated to the Code Talkers and sort of made one on his own.
So there are 10 categories of places on the map. So why don't we start with the food category? And I'm wondering what sorts of places you chose for that.
The food was really fun. So we wanted to do a few of these iconic places with iconic foods. We've got Cafe Du Monde in New Orleans with its delicious beignets. There are also places like Anchor Bar, where the buffalo wing was invented in, believe it or not, Buffalo, New York. We also looked to places that were sort of the firsts or the most prominent ones, and whether that's the first Sonic drive-in in Oklahoma and the first White Castle in Kansas, or even places like the Idaho Potato Museum, which tells the story of a pretty important food in U.S. agricultural history. So to me, this was almost the hardest category to narrow down, but was also the most fun category to brainstorm.
Let me zero in on one in particular. Tell me about the Pekin Noodle Parlor.
This is the oldest continuously operated Chinese restaurant in America. We really wanted to include this spot because it not only represents Americanized Chinese food, which is sort of cuisine unto itself, but also tells a bigger story of Chinese immigration to America.
Where is it?
It's in Butte, Montana.
That's fascinating. I never would have thought that the first Chinese restaurant would be in Montana.
First continuously operated. So it's possible there were earlier ones elsewhere, but the one that still exists is there. The Chinese immigrants first came to Butte in the 1860s. They worked on the railroads. They worked in the gold mining facilities. And as we've seen with so many immigrant populations over the years, with the workers, then come families, then come services to cater to those families, laundries, general stores, pharmacies, and restaurants. But by 1870, Chinese immigrants were 10% of Montana's population.
Wow. So how were they treated once they came to the U.S.?
Not well. Unions organized boycotts of businesses. Nativist campaigns tried to evict them from Butte and Montana overall. But what's amazing is even after all that and the Chinese Exclusion Act, which Congress passed in the 1880s, Chinese communities still persevered.
So let's move on to the natural world category. What kinds of places might I find there?
These are places that give you a real sense of awe and admiration for the natural beauty within the U.S. But we didn't want it to be just physical sites. So it's also about experiences like whale watching in Monterey Bay in California, or watching a sandhill crane migration in Nebraska. So it's a mix of those kind of sites, but also places like Yosemite National Park or the Sequoias or Acadia, like some of these really iconic, just beautiful landscapes, Niagara Falls, the Everglades.
We've got a site in South Carolina, which is the Synchronous Fireflies. Can you tell me what that is?
Sure. So in Congaree National Park, for about 2 weeks in late spring, there's sort of a fireflies show. Rangers clear out the park in the early evening and let in those who have planned ahead with special tickets. They purchase it through a lottery, and it's incredibly competitive, but they're in for a real sight when this particular species of firefly flash in unison by the thousands, and they're all trying to find a mate at this time. I haven't seen it myself, but I imagine it's this truly stunning light show.
How about we head over to the Oddball America category? This is one of my favorites. So why did you decide to throw this one in there?
These are the sites that, like, you're on your cross-country trip and you're like, what? Who collected tens of thousands of troll dolls and, made a museum out of it? That's amazing. I got to go see it. One of the sites on there is the world's largest collection of the world's smallest version of the world's largest things. So someone has made a collection of miniatures of really big things like the Golden Gate Bridge. And so there's a museum just full of these miniatures of giant sculptures.
One of the selections on that list is the Unclaimed Baggage Center. What's that place?
Well, so if you've ever taken a plane flight and you see there are a couple extra bags left over and there's no one around to pick them up, and you wonder, like, well, whatever happens to them? Well, eventually they could end up at this shop in Alabama that's sort of like a Pawn Stars meets a Walmart for unclaimed baggage. So we did this great story a few years ago, and the proprietor said something along the lines of, the shells provide a snapshot of what's going on in America right now. You can get all sorts of stuff in there. You just never know. There's obviously going to be clothing, but you can get like a Rolex. You still have to pay a pretty penny, but probably not what you would have to do at retail. Or you can get musical instruments. I think someone grabbed a rug. So, like, you just don't know what you'll get.
And like you say, it's the stuff we're flying with, the stuff we feel is important to us, that we're bringing with us on a trip. So it's this cultural archive in a way.
That's what I love about it. There's no curator. They're just seeing, is this thing like in decent quality to sell?
I love that they're selling it. I mean, there's also something so American about making a business out of that.
They do donate a significant amount. It's not a purely capitalist enterprise.
As hard as it is to depart from the Unclaimed Baggage Center, I want to talk about the Witness to History category. Can you help me define that?
This was places where you can go and see where history happened. You can go to Valley Forge and imagine yourself around where George Washington and his troops weathered a rough winter. You can go to Stonewall Inn and see the spot that sparked the modern gay rights movement. You can go to Fort McHenry and see where the Star Spangled Banner flew that inspired Francis Scott Key to write what would become the national anthem.
Now, some of the places on the map actually have multiple sites within them. And one of those is the Frederick Douglass Historic Sites in Rochester, New York. What are these, Brian?
We're cheating a little with the mini maps.
Sneaky.
But there were some sites where either it's a conglomeration of celebrations, like Juneteenth, when the news of emancipation was delivered to the enslaved people of Galveston. There are a number of sites that have some historical significance. So rather than just pick one, because they're all within a few blocks of each other, we were like, okay, we're going to make a little mini map here and tell the broader story of Galveston and Juneteenth. And for Frederick Douglass, there are also a number of historic sites in Rochester where Frederick Douglass lived for about 25 years, where he had a real impact. And one of the sites, unfortunately, doesn't actually exist anymore. Corinthian Hall was the site where he made a very famous speech, What to the Slave is the 4th of July, and this was delivered on July 5th, 1852. The old meeting house where he delivered it, long since torn down. But there are a number of other places in Rochester where I felt it important to be able to tell Frederick Douglass's story.
Brian, what's the importance of that speech?
At this time, Douglass is very much a famous orator. He would travel around the country delivering lectures on abolition. What I think is really powerful with this speech is he talks about the nation's founders as indeed great men who had these ideals of freedom, who created a country built upon those ideals. He also raises their hypocrisy and the existence of slavery on the U.S. and how that is antithetical to the ideals of freedom. It marks this really important moment that it is worth celebrating, recognizing all that there is great about this country, while also recognizing that there is still work to be done to have it live up to its full promise.
Brian, you've been knee-deep in this project for a couple of years. I'm wondering how you're feeling now that it's out there.
Relieved for sure. This is one of those projects where the more time I spend on it, I could have made a different version of this 250 spots that I'd be equally proud of. I mean, there's just so much that we could have selected. And at a certain point, I had to be like, no, pencils down. You've made your list. Now it's time to do the work of pulling this map all together. It also inspired me a bit to recalibrate my thinking about this anniversary and thinking about finding ways to really admire the American people in American history and realizing that there are many, many things worth celebrating and being proud of.
For me, being in Boston and having lived in Boston now for, about 8 years, so much about the city just feels so historic.
Yeah.
So much feels so old.
Kelly Carter Jackson is a historian at Wellesley College, and she says Boston would be a must-add on her version of the Smithsonian map. It's got so much history coursing through its streets.
Yeah, especially abolitionist history. I studied the abolitionists. That was my first book. And to be able to like walk by houses that were on the Underground Railroad or that were safe houses, or to walk by a place and abolitionist David Walker lived here or Charles Sumner lived here. And a lot of it's been relatively well preserved. And it feels like the city just comes alive for you when you're looking for it. Because I think a lot of it can hide in plain sight. But when you're paying attention, it's pretty cool.
Kelly co-hosts the history podcast This Day. Her latest book is called We Refuse, A Forceful History of Black Resistance. While Kelly's not involved with the MAP project, she has been thinking a great deal about what the semi-quincentennial means at this moment, how the country has marked its other big birthdays, and the journey the United States has been on since its inception.
Most of history is messy and hard, but I still think it's good to sit with that. And the 250 is the perfect moment to look back and say, this is where we were. This is where we are now. What's our progress report? How are we doing?
I also talked with Kelly about how communities across the country are marking the 250th.
All states are doing their own thing. All counties, all towns have their own way that they want to memorialize or capture the moment. But what I do think is really fascinating is how you're seeing a lot of the bigger museums and historical societies that are taking stuff out of their warehouses and putting it on display. You know, some of the original documents that go along with the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. And then also just bringing back some of the speeches. There's some really powerful, stirring speeches by people that I think is a moment to think of the rhetoric of that time. We have all of these popular slogans, the give me liberty or the give me death, the Patrick Henry and all of that. So that is cool. But we did this at the 200th anniversary in 1976. And it kind of rolled out in this way that didn't really feel like it had a purpose or a mission.
Now, on the This Day podcast, you've spent a couple of episodes discussing America's bicentennial in 1976. And this was the last time the country got together and really celebrated a big birthday.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, why was 1976 an important year in U.S. history? Can you remind me what was happening at the time?
Oh, gosh, 76, so much culturally, socially, even politically. We are what has been the close of the civil rights movement. Post 1968, you have this new beginning of what will America look like without segregation, with these new civil rights. You have a new block of people voting for the first time. You have the end of the Vietnam War, in which people are deeply disillusioned about the country and its role of imperialism and empire throughout the world. Vietnam was one of those wars that did not have the sort of sweeping patriotism that World War II had. And so you have a lot of that disillusionment. You've got rock and roll, sex and drugs. But then you have a group of like the silent majority that has been fed up with those kinds of hippies and punks and kids that have been, for them, pushing the limits a little bit too far. So you have this mix of people that are all coming to a space where they're not sure themselves what America should be, because so much has changed in a short amount of time. In the 5-10 years leading up to the bicentennial, there's a lot of ambivalence and a lot of disillusion about where we are and if progress has actually been achieved. Economically, it's really tough for people. Interest rates are extremely high. Gas is very expensive. Groceries are very expensive. And people are feeling that tension and that push. And so trying to get people to celebrate a birthday of the nation, I think there's a little bit of cognitive dissonance there.
And then, of course, also coming out of the Nixon years and Watergate and the presidency falling into Ford's lap.
Yeah, and people do not listen. Ford does not inspire. Okay, he is not someone. He's not the leader that people voted for. To be fair, he's thrust into this position. So there's a lot of scandal around him, and Ford is also a person who is kind of cutthroat and careless when it comes to the economy. I'll never forget, I teach a class on this where the headline was Ford to New York City, drop dead. You know, the idea that the federal government was not coming to save you, that they were not going to bail you out. And that's where I think this disillusionment comes in, where people no longer believe that the government is this great big father that is going to help them or is dependable. You start to find out like, oh, your father has flaws. That is very much front and center in the 70s. And then on the heels of that, I mean, we did a whole episode on Roots, and Roots was this cultural phenomenon.
Alex Haley's historical novel, Roots, The Saga of an American Family, tells an intergenerational story, starting with Kunta Kinte, a boy from West Africa who was sold into slavery in North America in the 1700s.
The book comes out in 76, and it's a bestseller by all stretch of the imagination. And then right after the Centennial is over, at the start of 77, you have this epic TV miniseries in which people are glued to the TV. And now, not only are they thinking about the recent birthday of the country, but what does it mean to think about America as a land of slavery, a land that was built upon the backs of enslaved Africans. And it just opens up the floodgates to a whole new set of conversations that some people are willing to have and some people are not.
Kelly, in 1976, what did patriotism look like?
Depending on who you ask, especially in the 1970s, patriotism is going to look a lot different. I think patriotism looks different, certainly for veterans returning from war, dealing with PTSD. So for me, it really does depend on who you're asking and what the context is. Are we talking about love of country? Are we just talking about the superficial things, you know, a good barbecue and 4th of July? Or are we talking about what does it really mean to be an American and to own that identity and take love and pride and joy in that identity, but also hold that identity to a high standard and to say, no, this is the bar. This is where we need to be. And if we're not there yet, how do I hold my country accountable?
Kelly talks about this complexity with her students.
When I take them on field trips or when we go to museums, I want them to pay attention to what they see. And then my follow-up question is always, but what do you not see? Who's not speaking? Who's not here? Those questions are so important. So when we celebrate the 250th, it's like, you know, George Washington and Thomas Jefferson and all of that. And, you know, you have your Ben Franklin, you have your sort of quintessential heroes. And sure, there's a reason for that. But I'm always asking, what does the 250 look like for Indigenous people? What does the 250 look like for women? What does the 250 look like for people who were enslaved at that time? What does it look like for poor white farmers? What is the promise of America for all Americans? And is it being fulfilled?
Yeah. What if these sorts of celebrations looked even before the bicentennial, other birthdays and other milestones of the passage of time for the U.S.? How did those look?
When I think about, let's just say, 1876, you're looking at a presidential election. You're looking at the end of Reconstruction. For a lot of African Americans, it is not the start of something progressive, but the end of something progressive. The hope toward enfranchisement is now gone. And that was tough. The country was still reeling from the Civil War. Those tensions were still very much there between a divided North and South. And reunion among white Northerners and white Southerners was at play. But for the rest of the country, there would be no reunification. There would be no push to try to get all people on the same page. And so when I think about those moments, you know, I think that there's no celebration in the world that could compensate for the stripping of rights, for the rolling back of protections. There's no parade I would exchange for my protection, for my civil rights. No way. So we don't get a lot of moments to do this and do this right. And that's why I think historians are constantly trying to call people to pay attention, to look at the past and to try to think of how we can improve ourselves. But it's tricky work.
It strikes me that the 50th, the 100th, the 250th, they arbitrarily arrive. And depending on who you are, you might choose a very different kind of moment that could feel to you celebratory for the country. But what these 50-year increments introduce is a kind of random, like, freeze frame.
Yeah.
Where are we at now? What you're describing is that we're marking 250 years as a country. This country means things to different people in different ways, and some will celebrate it, and some will find other ways to mark that passage of time.
I absolutely agree. I want America to always be improving and to always be striving to literally give everyone life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That is what I want for everyone. People want to be safe and protected. They want to be able to have rights. They want to have a voice. They want their voice to count, to matter. They want a democracy. They want a healthy exchange of power. It's like there are certain things that we do all benefit from when we work together. But I'm not wedded to a certain date in order to achieve that. I want that now. I want it now. Because here's the thing. If we make it about numbers, then you'll just wait. We got another 49 years. I got time. You know what I mean? Or you might say, well, that's not in my lifetime, so good luck, next generation. You know, I don't want anyone to feel like they can just keep kicking the can down the road for someone else to deal with. MLK said this quote, and I use it all the time in my class, but he says, change does not roll in on the wheels of inevitability. It comes through continuous struggle. So the idea that, like, of course women will get the right to vote. No, that's not inevitable. That comes through continuous struggle. Of course slavery will go away. No, that came through struggle. There's no right, there's no moment, no progress, no win, no victory that just eventually shows up. People have to agitate for that. They have to work for that. They have to push and struggle and fight and sometimes die for that. And we can't take that for granted.
You've helped me recognize the 250th anniversary as an opportunity to really study ourselves and to study this country and to use it as a moment to take pause, to see where we've been before, the challenges we've struggled through before, some of which we've overcome and some of which we still struggle with, the way in which we're one, the way in which we're many, and how to look ahead, like you say, not to the tricentennial, but to the tomorrow.
To the today, to the right now. I would encourage every single person for America's birthday, give America 2 gifts. Find something about America that excites you. Go to a national park, go to a museum, go to a historical marker, take pictures, bring friends, do a picnic there, you know, have a moment, whatever it is. Find something that you want to celebrate that you're like, oh my gosh, I love this so much about America. Then do that. And then find something that's hard and complicated and ugly and sad and go there too and sit with it. And think about it and bring your friends and talk about it and really try to figure out how that could have happened too. Do both. You can absolutely do both. I do that with my children. We go to hard places and we go to really fun places. And I'm showing them early that America is both.
To check out the interactive 250 Places to Celebrate America map, visit smithsonianmag.com/250 places. It's fabulous. We also encourage you to check out Kelly's podcast, This Day. They're doing a whole series of 50 weeks that shaped America. We'll put links in our show notes. On the next episode of There's More to That, we'll explore an underappreciated global health concern, deadly snake bites, and the hunt for a universal antivenom. If you like this show, please consider leaving us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, the iHeartRadio app, or wherever you get your podcasts. It helps new listeners find the show, and we'd be grateful. There's More to That is a production of Smithsonian Magazine and PRX Productions. From the magazine, our team is me, Debra Rosenberg, and Brian Wolly. From PRX, our team is Ali Budner, Cleo Levin, Genevieve Sponsler, Sandra Lopez-Monsalve, and Edwin Ochoa. The executive producer of PRX Productions is Jocelyn Gonzales. Our episode artwork is by Emily Lankiewicz, fact-checking by Stephanie Abramson. I'm Ari Daniel. Thanks for listening.
Do you have plans for how you're going to celebrate the 250th?
I have been trying to think about what are some spaces I can take my kids. I've got 3 kids, and they're the perfect ages. They're 11, 8, and 5, and they are very much engrossed in history.
Are they engrossed in history because their mom's engrossed in history?
Oh, they have no choice. They have no choice. I mean, my daughter, I can't tell you how much I beamed with pride when my middle child came home with an American Girl book, and it was the story of Addie. And I was like, oh my God, let's do this. Let's go. These are all the characters that I read as a little girl that got me into history. The American Girl collection was just like, pick a historical era, and they had a girl that was living her life in that moment. So yeah, I'm all in. They get annoyed by me. They really do. But they have no choice.